Gear CU was a virtual event where we brought credit union IT leaders and cybersecurity professionals with a handful of our proven partners for a 90-minute session. In this segment, you will hear from our partners at 1111 Systems. We chose them because detection is only half of the story. The other half is recovering when ransomware or the likes actually get through. They specialize in backups and disaster recovery, and examiners now want proof you can actually recover, not just that you have backups. Let's hear what 1111 had to say.
So, should the worst happen, obviously, when we think of cyber resilience, cyber prevention, and everything that was just being discussed a moment ago is so critical. The hygiene, having your assets protected properly, and the speed of detection that the entire team was just covering, obviously incredibly vital and valuable. What I'm going to cover for us today is more on, as Brian mentioned a moment ago, the data protection and recovery side, so that, while it's a cliche term saying not a matter of if, but when, but should the worst happen, you have a strong plan built specifically for people in the financial space. And let me cover that in a little bit more detail. We're going to go through this fairly quick because I'm absolutely preaching the choir, but there's a lot of data that says having a cyber recovery strategy in place that's validated and that can be executed at time of need is really critical. And the reasons why is there's a lot of organizations that unfortunately in the financial space are targeted, as was mentioned a moment ago by the team. Y'all are in a highly targeted industry. And unfortunately, a lot in your space have ransomware events and ultimately pay the ransom. One thing that's staggering to me, though, is based on stats, there's almost a near one-to-one correlation of paying a ransom and having a plan in place that's specific to cyber preparedness and cyber recovery, all additive to the prevention and recovery piece of it. And if you need any reminders on why the ransom is not a viable strategy, of course, is that when you pay the ransom, no guarantee that you're going to get that data back. So all challenges you're likely aware of, and what we're going to build on over the next 10, 15 minutes is where 1111 can help on this. But knowing the credit union space, which we work a lot with in the financial industries from an 1111 perspective, y'all have additional challenges on top of that you probably have to contend with as well. And a big piece of that is ultimately trying to serve your members and clients as best as you can, but also having fixed budgets, fixed resources to make all that occur. So when I think of the various credit unions and financial organizations I work with day in and day out, I know you'll have a lot on your plates related to IT complexity and costs, as was mentioned by the entire team a moment ago. These things keep evolving, getting more complicated. We also know, of course, when it comes to the cost side of it, it's really hard to fix a budget these days, especially when the licensing, the hardware, and the data center space is in some cases doubling and tripling year over year. So a lot of challenges there. Certainly a lot of challenges on the IT talent side of things, as many are going to other places within the IT industry out of financial right now. And then, as mentioned multiple times, y'all are in a very highly targeted industry. So the goal of my presentation today will be to quickly outline where 1111 can help with some of these challenges. Our goal is to get you to a much more resilient financial environment, again, focusing really on that right of boom recovery piece of it, talking about where we can help maximize budget allocation, knowing you have in the credit union space a lot of contingencies around that, showing where we augment or complement your staff to get you much more expertise and better service delivery, and ultimately where we can reduce risk. Many of you may be familiar with 1111, but if you're not, our organization has grown through 11 acquisitions over the past 4 or 5 years, and many of the best in the IT space have joined our company in terms of data protection, resiliency, connectivity to power our customers' needs. But if you're less familiar with us, we're really well known, as Ryan mentioned, in the data protection and recovery side of it, leading the Gartner Quadrant for multiple years and a lot of vendor accolades. None of that matters, though. Really what matters is our ability to deliver outcomes to financial organizations such as yourselves. And let's talk about 3 ways we can help you with that over the next few minutes. The first way that we provide a lot of capabilities on is related to the people and process side. As mentioned a moment ago, a big challenge that I see over and over again, specifically with financial and even unique to the credit union side, is maintaining and cultivating a team of experts within the organization. And this is where often 1111 can help. We bring decades of experience to the table. We're the largest disaster recovery and business continuity cloud provider private cloud provider globally. 14 different locations, thousands and thousands of organizations we work with. And so day in and day out, we help a lot of people with this planning side of it and the process side of it as well. So where you can help get help from an 1111 perspective on this is often related to some big challenges you have of business impact analysis related to what tier of vital resources or compliance alignment are applications and data within your environment. How do you actually plan to bring those online should an event happen? How will that plan differ if it's a natural disaster, for example, versus a cyber event? How do you exercise that program? Meaning multiple tests per year in a non-disruptive, truly validated way. And perhaps one of the biggest challenges we see time in and time out with organizations in the financial space is how do you maintain that? Change is constant in IT. Threat changes are occurring, as was mentioned before, and how do you update and modify that? So some things that we could do specifically related to the financial space here is we know y'all are investing in this and you're trying to maximize how your budget goes towards things. We could do a financial assessment around compliance and risk, seeing what tools and resources you already have in place, and specifically on the data recovery and protection side, what's going to best complement that to make sure that you can get that data applications back online in a secure, clean manner in a post-event scenario. And in that regard, one of the things we really specialize working with organizations like yours is coming in, as mentioned before, through those business impact analysis or working hand in hand with you, identifying what's vital, the VDA or vital data assets in your environment is what's ultimately critical to you from a compliance, from a member impact, from a visibility perspective, and how can we uniquely create plans to securely protect that data, to securely validate that data, and to securely bring that data back online, which can be a real challenge for a lot of people in the financial space, especially, again, with some of those budgetary limitations and the cost increases that have happened. So where else can we help? Well, we were just talking about people and process. Let's talk a little bit about the technology and what's powering those recoveries as well. When I think about the threats that you face, it's multifaceted, right? On one side of the equation, you need to plan for having your members, their data and applications available from threats such as hardware failure, natural disasters, power outages, some of the more traditional risk vectors that a lot of organizations in the financial space need to contend with. And for that, 1111 has the ability to bring data online, typically with an RTO and RPO in minutes. And if you're not familiar with those terms, RTO and RPO simply mean how recent is the data we're bringing online and how long does it take to bring that data online when an event begins. So for financial organizations that we serve, across thousands of organizations, this is something that's typically very critical for them, speed of recovery, and giving their clients and members access to their data and applications. However, as was already mentioned, and you already know if you're on the call today, those aren't where the risks end for you from a financial side. Probably the biggest component today, and was called out in the previous presentation, of the risk of inside threats as well, is ultimately getting to a scenario where your data has been corrupted, encrypted, or deleted from risks such as cybercrime, malicious insiders, or hacker threats within the environment as well. And as many of you may know, when the risk is related to cyber, things like RTO and RPO become a secondary priority. And the bigger priority comes to data cleanliness, compliance, and making sure that what you put back in the environment is not going to reinfect the environment or cause that risk to grow. As was mentioned in the previous conversation, time is of the essence, but thoroughness and efficiency is also really, really critical here. So if you haven't gone through this process before, like I said, from a cyber recovery perspective, you're not looking at that latest copy of the data. You're looking for clean data. You may be working with cyber insurance teams. You may be working with digital forensics teams. As was mentioned before, there are lots of layers to this as well. And what a lot of financial organizations, especially in the credit union space, may struggle with here is, where does this excess capacity, staffing, and expertise come into play to allow for a clean room recovery, to allow the right teams access to the data, to validate the cleanliness, and ultimately get you up and operational should a cyber threat occur? These are big challenges. And as mentioned before, these are not a pick one or the other. These are really complementary to each other. And so a lot of organizations in the financial space have challenges related to how do I power those outcomes? Well, there's a couple things that we've seen happen before, right? Which is the do-it-yourself dilemma. And if you've gone through this before, you know it's painful. My background is 20 years in the data protection and data recovery space. It's challenging to get through this piece of it. If you tried to do a recovery site, clean room operations yourself, especially with some of the modern challenges related to the cost of environments going up, the licensing going up, the data center power cooling going up, it's even more prohibitive than before. But if you've tried to do this in the past, you know you often have to make compromises. Are you going to have potentially unused hardware, or are you going to cut corners and not have a full production environment should the worst happen? As we mentioned a moment ago, a lot of organizations have challenges in the financial space of having staffing and resources available to power their recovery. It's a big challenge. Are you going to be able to have your teams focus on the production environment and the secondary environment at the same time? That can be a major concern for a lot of organizations as well. And then if you think about performance limitations and gaps there, as you likely know, probably preaching the choir again on this, data growth is staggering for a lot of financial institutes that are keeping data for certain requirements related to compliance, or just having massive growth around the amount of data that they're processing or bringing in. So often you can outgrow your data recovery or clean room plans very, very quickly. What 1111 looks like for you as a potential customer is we shift that spend to the cloud. And ultimately, what we're providing our organizations we work with on a clean room and on a disaster recovery perspective is saying, let's shift your spend to reserving storage in our environments for replication purposes and for recovery purposes, and let's give you access to compute on demand. It's a much better shift for a lot of organizations where you can do testing, you can do recovery, you can even convert a DR plan into a full production environment with a couple approaches there and power your environment and your recovery. On our side of the equation, management's eliminated. There's a couple different options that we have, but at the bare minimum, we're covering all the infrastructure management and recovery elements of the environment. All the hardware, data center, cooling, networking, all the way up to the OS and application level. And should your organization need management and recovery, a plan, validation, audit support, we can do those things as well. So you could truly augment your staff and have better recovery on that side. And then last but not least, built for scale. Like I mentioned, we are the largest privately held cloud service provider publicly or globally, I should say, for VMware and Broadcom. And we've got thousands of organizations we help out. That leads to very good capacity and economies of scale, especially with the market conditions around hardware and software cost increases. So the easy question is probably going to be, okay, the cloud is a good fit for data recovery and clean room. And hopefully at this point, I'll do a brief recap in a moment. You can see where 1111 is not just providing technology, but also people and process, which I would argue is even more critical than technology. But if you've looked at the cloud before, how is this any different? Well, the reality is, as you may know or may have experienced, that a lot of organizations that go to the cloud find that it is very difficult to understand what you're spending money on and what you're getting results from. There's a Gartner stat from last year that says in 2024, 80% of organizations that move to the cloud overspent by 40%. And if you're in the credit union space and you're trying to serve your members on a predictable budget, 40% overspend is staggering. And where this often comes from is just how sold separately and managed separately a lot of the different components related to clean room, disaster recovery, and production hosting are from a traditional cloud perspective. Often you're going to a marketplace, you're paying egress, you're paying API calls, you're paying a lot more than you expect. And again, that 20 to 40, 50% overspend is not an 1111 statistic. This is analysis and vendor statistics that ultimately show this. And if you're familiar with the term repatriation, there's been in some cases organizations that have looked at the public cloud and realized due to costs that they needed to shift some resources back on-prem or to another cloud environment. So just bear that in mind. The cloud is a great spot to look at for recovery, clean room capabilities, but not all clouds are created equally, especially when predictability and budget and member outcomes is a big priority, as it often is for you and your organizations. So as we wrap up on my piece today, just a couple things to mention here. As I said, with the size and scale of our organization, there are a lot of different financial institutes that we help in and day out. And often they, as we mentioned before, have similar challenges relating to needing to maximize their budget efficiency, having legacy hardware with cost increase and software licensing complexity. If they do have a secondary environment like this particular one I'm highlighting here, eliminating that is pretty critical to being able to do more financial efficiency. And then the ability to test recovery, specifically cyber recovery or specific events that you're concerned about, is a critical component. Now, team, while we covered and focused very heavily on disaster and cyber recovery today, it's definitely worth noting that if we're talking about doing business impact analysis or DR planning, it's not a one size fits all approach. To complement those services, 1111 has cloud backup, object storage, 365 protection. There's quite a few things that we layer into our offerings. We provide managed services around and also have a self-service console that wraps all of these different services into a turnkey approach for financial institutes. So this is a pretty critical component. As I wrap up on my component here today, and then we'll come back to you, Ryan, here in a moment. I know that, again, you'll have a lot on your plate when it comes to serving your members. Just in summary from what 1111 can do for you, we can help reduce risk. That's the name of the game for today's presentation. Depending on the service, we can get data loss down into minutes, seconds, depending on the capabilities. As just mentioned a moment ago, we can help tier your environment where it's not a one size fits all and actually find the right protection for the right application to further extend your budget. We can do testing during business hours in a non-disruptive way to make sure it works. We can shift you to a pay for what you use model. And at the end of the day, help you focus on your members' outcomes and their experience rather than throwing staff at this problem, as critical as it is. So if you heard something that you find interesting today, just one thing to note, 1111 has some tools in-house here built to show you what that monthly cost looks like, what the expectations, how long it takes to shift into a DR or production plan, typically weeks to do so. And we can run these free tools in your environment to prove savings and get a true assessment for you. But really, thank you for the time. And